Fix it. I don't care how. That stage is live in 10 minutes. The voice, sharp as shattered glass, cut through the cavernous backstage silence. Marcus flinched, not at the tone, but at the vibration it sent through the concrete floor. He kept his head down, focusing on the frayed wires of the park and light in his hands. His tools were old, the handles worn smooth by years of use, laid out on a piece of faded canvas. Beside them, his daughter Maya sat on an overturned crate, a small, still point in the vast, echoing darkness. Her babysitter had canceled last minute. A fever, she'd said, and Marcus's supervisor had been merciless. Be here or don't bother coming back. So here Maya was, quiet as a mouse, her worn unicorn backpack clutched in her lap, watching her father work. From the stage, another voice boomed through the monitors, this one colder, more controlled. No, Harrison. Again. The Q3 projections are not promising, they are sufficient. The word you are looking for is sufficient. Promising implies hope. We deal in data, not sentiment. Marcus glanced toward the blinding white light of the stage. He could see the silhouette of a woman, ramrod straight, at a gleaming steel podium. This was Eleanor Vance. The name was etched in glass on the skyscraper he cleaned every night. He'd never seen her this close. She was a legend, a myth made of profit margins and hostile takeovers. Insufficient data leads to insufficient outcomes, she continued, her voice an icy current. And your performance lately has been profoundly insufficient. Get off my stage. The harshness of the command, amplified and distorted by the massive sound system, struck the cavernous space like a physical blow. Maya gasped, her small body jerking. Her eyes, wide and suddenly bright with tears, fixed on the stage. A low whimper escaped her lips, then another, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence left in the wake of the CEO's dismissal. The echoing emptiness seemed to amplify her distress, turning her soft cries into a feedback loop of anxiety. Her hands went to her ears. Marcus set the broken light down without a sound. His entire focus shifted. The 10-minute deadline, the angry executive, the formidable CEO, they all dissolved. There was only Maya. He knelt before her, his large, calloused hands gently taking hers. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He led her away from the main stage, deeper into the wings where forgotten relics of past productions were draped in dusty shrouds. Tucked into a dark corner, under a single bare work light, sat an old grand piano. Its mahogany was scarred and its keys were yellowed, a forgotten king on a dusty throne. Marcus lifted the fallboard. He sat on the worn bench, pulling Maya onto his lap, her small body still trembling. Her tear-streaked face was buried in the worn fabric of his janitor's uniform. He placed his fingers on the keys. He didn't play a song, not really. He played a sound. A simple C major chord, soft as felt, held until the note almost faded completely. Then another, and another. He began to weave a simple, repetitive melody between them, a two-note phrase that rose and fell like a slow, steady breath. It was a lullaby, one without words, one he had composed in a hospital waiting room years ago. It wasn't a performance. It was a prayer. It was the sound of safety, a gentle shield of harmony pushed against the world's sharp edges. The music filled their small pocket of darkness, quiet, unassuming, and profoundly kind. Maya's trembling subsided. Her breathing deepened, syncing with the rhythm of the notes. She was safe. On the stage, Eleanor Vance had been watching the new executive, a terrified young woman, place a fresh glass of water on the podium. She was about to resume her tirade when the first soft notes reached her. They were faint, almost imperceptible, yet they cut through the sterile tension of the auditorium with impossible clarity. She stopped. The sound wasn't part of the presentation. It was real. Her eyes scanned the darkness of the wings. Through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains, she saw them. The janitor and the little girl, bathed in the solitary glow of a work light, at the forgotten piano. She saw the man's broad back curved protectively around the child. She saw his hands, rough and clearly accustomed to labor, moving with an impossible gentle grace over the keys. She saw the girl's head resting on her father's chest, her fear melting away with each soft chord. Eleanor's own hand rose, involuntarily, to her throat. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding escaped in a sharp, silent gasp. Her entire world was built on leverage, on calculated transactions and the unflinching application of pressure. What she was witnessing was an act of pure, non-transactional grace. It was a language of strength she had never learned, a power that didn't conquer, but healed. It solved a problem, a child's panic, with beauty. She was not impressed. She was fundamentally shaken. The perfectly rehearsed words of her speech felt like ash in her mouth. She stood frozen at the podium, a queen in a glass tower, watching a quiet man in a gray uniform build a fortress of love out of broken keys and gentle notes. When the last note faded, and the man simply held his daughter, Eleanor found her feet moving. She walked off the stage, her expensive heels making no sound on the thick carpeting, and moved toward the pool of warm light in the darkness. He looked up as she approached, his expression not of fear, but of quiet, unwavering calm. His arm was still wrapped around the sleeping child. Eleanor's gaze fell from his face to the broken stage light still lying on the canvas cloth beside his tools, its wires splayed and useless. Then she looked back at him. Her corporate authority felt like a hollow, ridiculous costume. All she had was a question that had nothing to do with lights or stages or quarterly projections. Marcus accepted the job. The title was Special Projects Coordinator, a vague and meaningless designation that came with a salary that would change everything for Maya. He was moved from the night shift to the day, given a small, windowless office on the executive floor that had once been a supply closet. It was clear no one, least of all Harrison Thorne, the vice president, knew what to do with him. Harrison would walk by Marcus's open door, a smirk playing on his lips. "Settling in?" he'd ask, his tone dripping with condescending amusement. "Let me know if you need a new mop." Marcus would simply nod. His silence a wall Harrison couldn't seem to scale. Eleanor gave him no specific tasks. Instead, she seemed to want him simply there, in her orbit. He moved through the gleaming, sterile halls of Vance Innovations with the same quiet attention he'd given the building when he was invisible. He noticed things. He saw that the hinge on the heavy glass door to the main boardroom had a subtle, high-pitched squeak that made Eleanor's jaw tighten every time she heard it. One morning, before anyone arrived, he fixed it with a drop of specialized oil from his own kit. The next time she walked through it, the silence was so complete she paused mid-stride, a flicker of surprise on her face. He saw that her executive assistant, a nervous young man named David, brought her a black coffee every morning at precisely 8 a.m., and that the coffee sat on her desk untouched until it was cold. One afternoon, Marcus saw her in the small executive kitchen, staring at a selection of herbal teas with a look of exhausted indecision. The next morning, he arrived early and left a small, unmarked box of chamomile tea on David's desk with a simple note. "Maybe try this." He watched from his doorway as David brought her the tea. Eleanor took a sip, and for the first time that day, the rigid line of her shoulders softened, if only for a moment. He was a ghost in her machine, patching small, human-sized holes in a structure of cold efficiency. He never sought credit. He simply observed and acted. For Eleanor, his presence was a quiet anomaly. He was the only person in her life who seemed to want nothing from her. He didn't flatter her, didn't pitch her ideas, didn't jockey for position. He just was. He fixed what was broken, whether it was a faulty latch or a frayed nerve. Her curiosity deepened into a quiet respect. She started finding reasons to speak with him, asking him to look at schematics for a new building expansion, not for his technical input, but for his perspective. "Where would the light feel best in the morning?" she asked once, pointing to a blueprint of a new employee wellness center. He didn't talk about lumens or electrical load. He talked about how people would feel. "Here," he said, his finger tracing a line on the eastern wall, "so they can feel the sun when they arrive. It's a better way to start the day." He was solving emotional problems, not technical ones, and it was a form of genius she had never encountered. Her world was loud with ambition and strategy. His was a world of quiet observation and gentle, effective action. And the more he brought his quiet world into hers, the more she realized how hollow her own had become. One evening, long after the offices had emptied, Eleanor sat at her vast marble desk, the city lights glittering like a cold, distant galaxy through her floor-to-ceiling windows. A headache pulsed behind her eyes. She was exhausted, the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing down on her. It was then that she heard it again. Music. It wasn't the simple lullaby from backstage. This was different. It was a torrent of notes, complex and layered, pouring from somewhere down the hall. It was a sound of profound, aching sorrow, a melody steeped in a grief so deep it was almost overwhelming, yet woven through with a thread of fierce, unbreakable love. She rose from her desk, drawn by the sound as if by an invisible current. She followed the music to the main boardroom, the one with the silent glass door. The room was dark, save for the blue-white glow of the city outside. And there, at the glossy black grand piano that was more a piece of corporate furniture than an instrument, sat Marcus. His back was to her. He thought he was alone. His hands moved across the keys not with the precision of a technician, but with the raw, desperate grace of a man speaking his soul's native language. The music was a confession. It told a story of a love found and a love lost, of a world shattered and painstakingly rebuilt, piece by tiny piece. It was the sound of a heart that had been broken wide open and had somehow, impossibly, learned to keep beating. This was not a hidden talent. This was a man's entire history, his whole being translated into sound. Eleanor stood in the doorway, concealed by the shadows, and listened. She didn't breathe. She didn't move. She was witnessing something sacred, a glimpse into the vast, hidden cathedral of his soul. The quiet janitor, the kind father, the special projects coordinator. They were all just masks. The real man was here, at this piano, speaking a truth more eloquent and powerful than any business proposal she had ever heard. She saw the shimmer of tears on his cheeks in the reflected city light. When the final, heartbreaking chord faded into the silence of the empty building, he rested his forehead on the piano, his shoulders shaking with a silent sob. Eleanor backed away slowly, her own heart aching with an emotion she couldn't name. It was more than empathy. It was a profound sense of recognition. In his grief, she saw the mirror of her own loneliness. She had built an empire to insulate herself from pain, while he had transformed his into something beautiful. She retreated to her office, the echo of his music replaying in her mind. The distance between them, the chasm of status and power, had vanished. In that moment, she didn't see a subordinate. She saw a man who was infinitely more whole than she was. A few weeks later, Vance Innovations held its first-ever family day, an idea Eleanor had pushed through a bewildered board of directors. The sterile office was transformed, awkwardly, with balloons and snack tables. Marcus brought Maya, who looked at the towering glass and steel with wide, curious eyes. While other executives paraded their children around like miniature accessories, Marcus kept Maya close, letting her quietly observe the strange new world. Eleanor found them in her office. She had invited them under the pretense of showing Maya the view. Her office was a pristine expanse of white marble and chrome, minimalist and severe. A single, starkly framed photograph sat on her desk. A much younger Eleanor standing beside a formidable, unsmiling man, her father. Maya walked around the vast room, her small sneakers silent on the polished floor. She didn't seem impressed by the panoramic view of the city. Instead, her gaze kept returning to the sterile emptiness of the space itself. She walked up to Eleanor, who knelt down to be at her level, an uncharacteristically awkward gesture for the CEO. "Your office is very quiet," Maya said, not with judgment, but with simple observation. "I need it to be quiet to think," Eleanor replied, her voice softer than usual. Maya's eyes drifted to the photograph on the desk. She pointed a small finger at it. "Is that your daddy?" Yes, it is. Maya tilted her head. He looks sad, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis. Eleanor froze. No one had ever said that. They called her father powerful, brilliant, ruthless, but never sad. And yet, looking at it through the child's eyes, she saw it was the unvarnished truth. He wasn't smiling. He was performing, just like she was. It was a truth bomb, delivered with the devastating innocence of a child, and it hit its mark. Before Eleanor could respond, Maya held up a piece of paper she'd been clutching. It was a drawing, done in bright, bold strokes of crayon. It depicted 3 figures: a tall man with a kind smile, a little girl with a unicorn on her shirt, and a woman with striking red hair, just like Eleanor's. They were all holding hands under a huge, smiling yellow sun. In the background was a building that looked suspiciously like the Vance Tower, but with flowers growing out of the windows. "This is for you," Maya said, pushing the drawing into Eleanor's hands. "So your office won't be so lonely." Eleanor stared at the drawing. Her throat grew tight. In her entire life, she had only ever been given things that were transactional: bonuses, stock options, awards. They were acknowledgments of achievement. This was a gift, a simple, profound offering of inclusion. A child had looked at her, the untouchable titan of industry, and seen not a queen in a tower, but a lonely woman who needed a friend. Tears pricked at the corners of Eleanor's eyes. She fought them back, the habit of a lifetime. She looked at Marcus, who stood by the door, watching them with a gentle understanding that made her feel even more exposed. He gave her a small, supportive nod. "Thank you, Maya," Eleanor said, her voice thick with unshed emotion. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever been given." She walked to her desk, a vast expanse of polished emptiness, and placed the crayon drawing right in the center. The splash of brilliant, chaotic color was a rebellion. It was a declaration. It was the first truly human thing to ever grace that sterile surface. And for the first time, she felt seen. That evening, a sudden summer thunderstorm broke over the city, trapping them in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The rain lashed against the panoramic windows, isolating them in their glass tower, the rumble of thunder a low, mournful counterpoint to the quiet hum of the building. Maya was asleep on the plush sofa in Eleanor's office, curled under Marcus's jacket. The shared intimacy of the storm, coupled with the emotional residue of Maya's gift, lowered their defenses. They sat in the dim light, the city a blur of rain-streaked neon below. "The music you play," Eleanor began, her voice quiet, probing the silence. "The other night, in the boardroom, it was for someone." Marcus looked out at the storm, his reflection a faint ghost in the glass. He was silent for a long time. "It was for my wife," he finally said. "Her name was Lena. She was a singer. That piece. It was the last thing I was writing for her before she—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The grief was still a living thing in his voice. He told her everything. About their life, a small, vibrant world filled with music. About his own career as a concert pianist and composer, a rising star. About the car accident on a rain-slicked road just like this one, that had taken it all away in an instant. He told her about the choice he'd had to make. The grueling, international tour schedule of a performer, or a quiet, stable life for the traumatized little girl who was all he had left of the woman he loved. "It wasn't a choice," he confessed, his voice raw. "Maya is her song now. My job is to make sure that song is safe." He had buried his own music, his own soul, to become a janitor, a handyman, a ghost in the background, because it was the only way he could be the father Maya needed. He saw it as a necessary sacrifice, a quiet penance. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and profound. Eleanor felt her own armor cracking under the weight of his honesty. She looked at the crayon drawing on her desk, then back at him. "My father," she said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "The man in the picture. He never gave me a gift. Not a real 1-inch," she told him about her childhood. A series of benchmarks and performance reviews. A perfect report card earned a stiff, formal dinner. Winning the state debate championship earned a nod of approval. Taking the company public earned her the CEO title. Love was a bonus paid out for exceeding expectations. "The one time I failed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A business venture in my 20s that collapsed. I went to him crying. I was so scared. He didn't hug me. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He sat me down in his study and gave me a 2-hour lecture on mitigating risk and the liability of emotional attachments." Her eyes were fixed on the rain. "I never cried in front of him again. I never cried in front of anyone again." She had built her empire on the lesson he taught her. Vulnerability is a weapon your enemies will use against you. Her emotional isolation wasn't an accident. It was a fortress she had meticulously designed and built, brick by loveless brick. In the storm-lit quiet of her office, two souls, exiled by different tragedies, saw their own wounds reflected in the other. He was exiled from his purpose. She was exiled from her heart. And for the first time, in that shared, fragile space, neither of them felt quite so alone. The delicate peace of their burgeoning connection was shattered by Harrison Thorne. Festering with jealousy and a sense of entitlement, he saw Marcus not as a colleague but as a cancer in the corporate body, a low-level worker who had somehow bewitched the CEO and usurped his rightful place as her heir apparent. He saw their quiet conversations, the shared looks, Eleanor's softening demeanor, and interpreted it all through the cynical lens of his own ambition. He hired a private investigator. It didn't take long to find ammunition. The period after Lena's death had been brutal for Marcus. Grief-stricken and suddenly a single parent, he had struggled. He'd been evicted from their apartment, worked a series of dead-end jobs, and had once been so broke he'd been investigated for neglect when Maya was a toddler, a baseless claim from a disgruntled landlord that was quickly dismissed. But the file existed. It was all Harrison needed. The attack was surgical and vicious. An anonymous tip was sent to a notorious corporate gossip blog. The story was framed with brutal efficiency. Ice Queen CEO Eleanor Vance in scandalous affair with company Janitor. It painted Marcus as a manipulative opportunist, a failed musician with a history of financial instability and child neglect, who had used his daughter to prey on a powerful woman. The article was filled with half-truths and twisted facts, all designed to create the most damaging narrative possible. Worse, Harrison made an anonymous call to Child Protective Services. He rehashed the old, dismissed claims, embellishing them with new, horrifying lies about Marcus's instability and the inappropriate environment Maya was being exposed to in the high-pressure corporate world. The blow landed exactly as intended. Marcus was at home one evening, helping Maya with her homework, when two CPS caseworkers knocked on his door. The experience was a quiet, soul-destroying horror. They questioned him, inspected his small, clean apartment, and looked at Maya with professionally sympathetic but deeply unsettling eyes. The fear that seized Marcus was primal. They could take her. They could take the only thing in the universe that mattered. He called Eleanor the next morning to resign. His voice was hollow, defeated. I can't put her through this," he stammered. "I have to protect her. I have to disappear." The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The consensus was swift and unanimous. Cut him loose. Issue a press release denying everything. Distance the company and its CEO from the scandal. It was the only logical move. Protect the brand. Protect the stock price. Eleanor listened to them, her face an unreadable mask of ice. When they were finished, she stood up. "No," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. "Every one of you is wrong." She turned to the head of her legal team. "I want our best internal investigators looking into Harrison Thorne. I want his emails, his phone records, everything. And I want the best family law attorney in the city on retainer. As of now, he works for me. And for Marcus." She left the stunned boardroom and drove straight to Marcus's apartment complex in a part of the city her chauffeured car had never been before. She found him packing boxes, his movements frantic and desperate. The apartment was small, but it was filled with warmth. Maya's drawings were taped to the walls, books were stacked on every surface, and the scent of cinnamon lingered in the air. It was a home, not the den of poverty the articles had painted. "I'm not letting you run," she said, standing in the doorway. "You don't understand," he said, not looking at her. "They can take her from me. That's the one thing I can't survive." "And you won't," she said, her voice fierce with a conviction that startled them both. "This isn't your fight anymore, Marcus. It's ours." She crossed the room and placed a hand on his arm, forcing him to stop, to look at her. "He didn't just attack you. He attacked my judgment. He attacked my family." The word hung in the air, new and powerful. "I built an empire to protect myself. Now I'm going to use it to protect you." In that moment she made her choice. She was no longer queen of the glass tower, protecting her sterile kingdom. She was a woman standing with the man she had come to love, ready to burn her old world down to defend their new one. They were an alliance. The annual Vance Foundation Gala was the crown jewel of the city's philanthropic calendar. It was a night of immense pressure and public scrutiny, the perfect stage for a corporate drama. Eleanor knew Harrison would be there. She also knew he felt cornered, which made him dangerous. He would try to use the public venue to solidify his narrative, to humiliate her and Marcus in front of the world. She decided to strike first. She took the stage in a stunning, severe black gown, the very picture of the untouchable CEO. But as she stood at the podium, her eyes found Marcus. He was standing near the back of the grand ballroom, wearing a simple, rented tuxedo that looked both foreign and distinguished on him. Beside him, Maya, in a little velvet dress, was being watched by David, Eleanor's trusted assistant. Marcus met her gaze and gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. It was all the reassurance she needed. "Good evening," she began, her voice crisp and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "Tonight, we are here to celebrate the power of art. We are here to fund the future of music and creativity for our city's children." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the powerful faces in the audience. "But before we do, I want to talk about value. Not market value or shareholder value, but human value." A nervous ripple went through the crowd. This was not the expected, sanitized speech. "For too long, my company, and perhaps I myself, have equated value with profit, with performance, with perfection. We have celebrated the loud, the aggressive, the relentless. But we have overlooked the quiet. We have overlooked the steadfast. We have overlooked the profound power of integrity." She then told them a story, never using his name, about a man of extraordinary talent who had willingly stepped away from the spotlight, who had traded the world's applause for the sacred duty of raising his child. She spoke of his quiet competence, his unwavering kindness, and the gentle strength that could mend what was broken in machines and in people. Then her voice hardened. "It has come to my attention that this man's integrity has been viciously and falsely attacked by someone within my own organization." She looked directly at Harrison Thorne, who stood near the bar, his face pale. Someone who mistook kindness for weakness. Someone who saw a threat where he should have seen an example. As of this morning, Harrison Thorne is no longer an employee of Vance Innovations. His actions were a violation of this company's ethics, and more importantly, a violation of basic human decency. A collective gasp filled the ballroom. Before the whispers could begin, Eleanor raised a hand. "Our scheduled performer for this evening, a celebrated concert pianist, had to cancel due to a family emergency. But I find myself believing that fortune has provided us with a far more meaningful replacement." Her gaze softened as it landed, once again, on Marcus. "There is a man here tonight who has a story to tell, and his language is music. Marcus, would you play for us?" The world seemed to stop. Every head in the room turned to look at the unknown man at the back. Marcus froze, caught in 1,000 spotlights of curiosity. He looked at Maya. Her face was shining with pure, uncomplicated belief in her father. He looked at Eleanor, standing alone on that massive stage, having risked her entire reputation for him, for them. He walked toward the stage. The journey through the sea of parted tuxedos and gowns felt a mile long. He sat at the magnificent Steinway, a far cry from the dusty relic backstage. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the silence settle. Then he played. It wasn't the lullaby of safety or the elegy of grief. It was something new, a composition born of the last few months. It began with a quiet, hesitant melody, the sound of isolation. Then it grew, chords of doubt and fear creeping in, a rising tension that mirrored the storm. But then, a new theme emerged, warm, clear, and full of hope. The two melodies danced around each other, clashed, and then, slowly, began to merge. The music swelled, filling the entire ballroom not with sorrow or anger, but with a triumphant, soaring declaration of resilience, of connection, of love found in the most unexpected of places. It was the sound of healing. When the final, resonant chord faded, there was a beat of stunned silence. Then the ballroom erupted. It was not polite applause. It was a roar, a standing ovation of profound emotional release. Marcus rose, bowed slightly, and walked off the stage. Eleanor met him in the wings. In front of the stagehands, the event staff, and anyone who could see, she did not shake his hand. She took it, lacing her fingers through his. The gesture was simple, public, and absolute. They were a unit, and they had won. Later that night, long after the gala had ended and the last guests had departed, they stood on a deserted terrace overlooking the glittering, sleeping city. The adrenaline of the evening had subsided, leaving a peaceful, quiet clarity in its wake. Maya was safely asleep in a hotel suite upstairs, chaperoned by the ever-loyal David. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice soft in the night air, "for believing in me." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, turning to face him. Her corporate armor was gone, leaving only the woman beneath. "For showing me what was worth believing in." The space between them, once a chasm of class and power, was now filled with a quiet, unshakable certainty. All the walls were finally down. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "I'm scared," she confessed. The words a raw, honest whisper she hadn't spoken since childhood. "Me too," he answered, his thumb stroking her skin. "But not when I'm with you." And then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or frantic relief. It was a kiss of arrival, of homecoming. It was gentle and deep and certain. It was the quiet, perfect resolution to a song that had, until now, been played alone. In the heart of the silent city, under the vast, watchful sky, they were no longer two fractured souls, but one. The company would change. The gossip would fade. What would remain was this quiet, unassailable truth. 18 months later, the afternoon sun streamed into a living room that was warm, cluttered, and alive. Sunlight glinted off the polished wood of a grand piano, but it also illuminated a happy mess of crayons on the floor, a half-finished puzzle on a soft rug, and a collection of Maya's drawings taped joyfully to the walls. Eleanor, dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, was on the floor with Maya, trying to fit a piece into the cardboard jungle scene. Her laughter was easy and frequent, a sound that now lived in this house as a permanent resident. At the piano, Marcus was composing, not with the aching sorrow of his past, but with a light, complex joy. The music was the home's gentle, ambient heartbeat. Spread across a large wooden table were architectural plans and mission statements for their new, shared purpose, the Lena Song Foundation. It was a non-profit dedicated to providing music education and grief counseling for underprivileged children and families who had suffered a loss. It was his way of honoring his wife's memory, not by hoarding his gift, but by giving it away. It was her way of building a legacy not of profit, but of care. It was the beautiful, perfect synthesis of their two worlds. Eleanor looked up from the puzzle and watched him, her heart full. He felt her gaze and stopped playing, turning on the bench to smile at her. The love that passed between them was a quiet, steady current. She walked over to the piano, leaning against it, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You have happy eyes," he said, his voice soft, echoing the perceptive wisdom of his daughter. Eleanor's smile was genuine, unguarded, and radiant. "They're just reflecting yours," she replied. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips for a soft kiss. The future was not a strategic plan or a series of benchmarks. It was this room, this light, this music, this chosen family, built not on blood or obligation, but on the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let the world break them. They had found the key to healing not in power or in hiding, but in each other. Where are you watching from? From a bustling city, a quiet town, or somewhere in between? If this story of love, healing, and quiet strength touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Your support allows us to continue creating stories that we hope bring a little more light into the world. Thank you for spending your time with us, for being a part of our community. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never stop listening for the music in your own life.